Fuck to Westport!
Any kind of hiccups or anything like that. It's just right there. There's no editing.
Hey, do me a favor. If Francis calls me old, edit that out.
Yeah.
Right. I'll go back and take that out. Yeah.
Oh,
Usually I do shows on Saturday, but I know just timing wise, again, you got family and all these things to do, so it doesn't work out.
Impossible for us.
Yeah. But I mean, I kind of feel like I've been involved in, like California, a few states, but like the legalization of things and like it kind of splits the scene, if you want, in a way. And I kind of almost feel like in a certain way, it's like the fight isn't over at all. It's just like, okay, now we've got them to accept that we're not criminals and that this stuff is pretty cool. But if we want it to at all be like what we think it should be, there's probably another like multi-decade fight in there.
Depends on where you live, right, Francis? If you live in Texas,
well,
they still don't understand.
If you live in, but even in California, I mean, so, and I know we're recording, so we can use.
We're not recording yet, I don't think.
Yeah, no,
we
are.
Yeah, we are. I just started.
Okay. So here, I have this thought, right, and I want to know what you think about it, Chad. Okay, so, right now, I would say that we have more technology, more data, and more access to information than we've ever had in the cannabis space, right?
Absolutely.
You can send your leaves off for leaf testing. You can get soil analysis. You can get all kinds of stuff. You can get people from universities to help you, perhaps. You can do all these different things. And I think in the last 10 to 15 years, well, I don't think I know this, but like the yields that people are getting now are preposterous compared to like when Gaby and I had a shop. Right,
preposterously high.
Yeah, like one per light was average. 1.5 was doing quite well. 2 was like certain strains under certain conditions.
People would think you were lying.
Now it's like it's crazy high. But so here's the weird part. So I think people have figured out how to grow flower and get weights that were unheard of before. But then it seems to me like there's an inverse relationship to quality, right?
Yeah.
Because here to me is the final frontier, right? Is that everybody's figured out, or not everybody, but we've really figured out how to increase yields with crop steering, all this different stuff, right? But the weed isn't as good. And all the old smokers pretty much agree that the weed isn't as good, right? And so why, when we have so much more power, so much more control, like 20 years ago, Chad, did you ever hear the word PPFD? Were you ever monitoring like your
more light? That's all you heard was more light. You need more light.
Yeah, like or VPD or like all these so it's like we're manipulating all these different things, and the weed is worse.
So can I ask you a question, NotSoDog?
Sure.
Do you remember back in the day? When we were growing all this top-notch weed, but the old timers would come in and tell us that it was shit, and that back in the day, Colombian gold and Panama red, this shit was so much better. I think part of it is nostalgia. So like people always ask me, they say, I mean, it's just a little part, not all of it, okay? But people always ask me, they say, well, what's your favorite weed? And I always say, well, the Chem 91. But I'm biased.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
biased.
Okay.
Like, the 91, that's my bitch. Like, so, like
there's a
there's a
bias.
bias.
However, if what I'm saying wasn't true, if weed from big rec scenes with all of their technology was better, then most heads would be going to places they could get rec weed because they couldn't replicate that at home. But it seems to me like no matter who I talk to, whether they're salt or organic or whatever, they prefer what's coming out of their garage or their tent to the warehouse.
I think there could be a variety of reasons for it. I think a lot of it is post harvest handling, and how long it actually takes to get to the consumer versus, I got my jars right here. But in regards to, like the 1 pound of light versus I get 3 of light, do you think it's the technology or do you think it's the genetics? Because honestly, I think I've seen genetics go the other way. Like everything, a lot of Sensi stuff, a lot of Afghanis used to just be the big old baby arms. Nowadays, we're getting these like little golf balls with like 4 inches in between each node. But yet we're still getting bigger yields. Do you think it's the technology or just genetics or a combo?
I mean, it's definitely, I definitely think it's both, in the sense that like social media and sharing, like I'll give a different example. I'll go way back. Okay. When Gabby and I had the shop, Gabby would go over to Amsterdam a few times, and he would be at these like big like hydro conferences, right? Because most of American indoor or greenhouse stuff was just trickle down technology from like what Northern Europe was doing to grow food, you know?
Yeah.
And I would Gabby and I would talk on the phone, and I'd be like, what do you think, dude? What's going on over there? And he's like, 98% of this is like not applicable to like what we're doing at all. It's like this thing, there's a machine here that can like go through 10,000 tomatoes in like an hour. There's this, there's that. And you go over there and they have these giant, so it's like, so I almost feel like as, okay, I'll give a different example. I saw this thing with the Jungle Boys where after a bajillion experiments they've done, they've settled on, I'm going to grow on Rockwool slabs with 4-inch Rockwool cubes on drip, which was the height of technology. The very first grow book I ever bought, right, was that. And they went through every permutation, and then they were like, what if we just copied the Dutch? How the Dutch food production model. What if we just did that? Because they have all this testing, they have all these sensors, they have all these computers, they have all this stuff. And so I'm not saying that kind of technology isn't valuable. I'm just saying that I don't think we figured out yet what makes weed the type of weed that we like. You know what I'm saying? Like we figured out how to unlock biomass.
Right. I think what you're comparing is not a reasonable comparison, because what you're comparing is commercial production to small, home growers, even if it was a garage at the time or something like that. I mean, even back in the day, NotSoDog, the guys that would buy 100 lights, they never produced the quality as the guys that, had 10 lights. And
that's the question we don't
because
know.
it's because number one, it's difficult to scale, and number two, those guys that have all those lights, they're interested more in money than quality.
Okay.
And so they had to make choices as far as what genetics, techniques, because they were more interested in making more money than growing the best weed.
Well,
when we were doing it, let me say this: when we were doing it, we were making enough money growing the best weed, so we were happy. We used to get.
Were you monocropping?
No. Mostly like we'd grow mostly super skunk and then a couple of plants of the Chem 91 for ourselves.
Okay.
So
right, head stash. Okay,
that's right.
Well, yeah, the weird thing about the Chem 91, okay, and I think this is just in general, but like there's a weird thing where if weed doesn't leak, like if the clone doesn't get out, then it can't be that popular. Right? Like brokers, I swear to God, dude, brokers would come up and they would be like, I'd be like, look at this. And they'd be like, yeah, that's some like weird OG bag seed. Like if it was that good, bro, I'd have access to it. So it can't be that good. You know what I'm saying? So it's almost like things need to leak, because if they don't leak, like there was a time with very long time ago where there was probably like 4 or 5 people in California that had the Chem 91, and we all had relatively small scenes. So it's like, but it was like me and Skunk VA and Gaby and our buddy Ben, who is IC Collective. That was pretty much it, wasn't it, Gaby? Anybody else? That was pretty much, and like, so like the biggest garden of those whole 4 was maybe like an 8 or a 10 lighter.
Wow.
But that was my point. That's
Like,
my
it
point.
was
Like
just-
you're comparing, you know, back in the day when most people were small growers.
Okay.
I mean, besides the, and I'm going to say his name right now, like besides Tony Sasso and his crew and the guys that were going and, buying 100 lights, most of us had a garage with 10 or 12 lights. And,
I have a buddy in Alaska that does one of the best jobs I know. Okay. As far as commercial stuff, he's got like a 40 lighter. All right. He can't get his 40 lighter to like, his personal at his house is still nicer, and he tries so hard to
you're making my argument,
but it's not nostalgia. I'm just saying he's growing the same thing.
It's also difficult to scale.
So
yeah,
but the reason why it's difficult to scale is I don't think we figured out yet, like what makes, like, okay, I almost think I have this weird thought that like maybe one of the reasons why organics comes out nicer is because the plant just doesn't get everything it wants all the time. Like
that makes it better.
Maybe some small amounts of stress. Like, because if you take nature, a plant is not going to grow for 6 months in like a very narrow band of moisture. You know what I'm saying? Like there's nothing controlling the drybacks. You know what I mean? It's going to suffer. Like deer might eat some of it. It might get some bugs. It might get some pests. It might have some, it like might create like, THC to protect itself against the UV from the sun type of thing.
So I like to argue with NotSoDog. That's why I podcast with him.
That's why I invited you guys.
And that's why I was like,
the gloves.
That's why I was like, hey, if I'm gonna do it, can we do it with NotSoDog? Also, the other reason why I wanted him to join is that way when I get really fucked up, I can like go quiet for a minute.
I cover for Gaby.
NotSoDog never shuts up.
He gets so baked.
But
I want
to say one thing.
Huh.
Killer Bees Trees on Instagram. Okay. I want to give him a shout out. He grew the best kind Chem 91 I think that I've ever seen, or some of the nicest that I've ever seen. And I believe he used LEDs and modern nutrients, and so like I do, and I think part of the reason why he did was we've learned a lot, and I believe that it is possible for us, if we're growing the same genetics, to do better today than we did back then, because of that knowledge that we have, because of those tools that we have, because we have leaf analysis that we can do. Those are all super valuable tools that I wish we had back in the day. Tools aren't bad, it's how they're used, right? Like if you use this crop steering and you're pushing and pushing and pushing, well, yeah, that's going to affect the quality. But if you're still looking at all this data that we have and using it for good instead of for evil, I think that it's valuable.
Are we introducing the epigenetic changes in this fashion?
So the crazy thing about the Chem 91 is the Chem 91 has aged quite gracefully. And when I look at the highest quality Chem 91, like that stuff that Killer Bees grew, I'm like, I don't really notice too much negative effects of now Sour Diesel. Sour Diesel has not aged as gracefully. And either have I. I mean, my hair used to be longer than Chad's. you know.
Right. Well,
But
not to like pause the conversation, but there's something I've kind of been dying to ask there, Gabby, is, as we get to the sour diesel is, I specifically look back at like 2011, 2012, when like the Adam Dunn show, they were doing the OG Gnome project. They were bringing everybody on, trying to get the sour. They had JJ, they had AJ, we're talking Weasel, we're talking Klopsky, we're talking this guy Staten Island, right? We're talking all these different names. Now, fast forward a few years, we know who some of these people are, particularly that last one. I've always been curious during that time when all these people were talking about this and saying all these, Staten Island this, Staten Island that. Did you know? Were you aware? Did somebody call you up one day and say, hey, by the way, everybody's telling stories about this mysterious guy that's so involved?
No, including NotSoDog. NotSoDog was talking about me, and nobody was letting me know. And people, NotSoDog was like, well, he's kind of, private, and I was like,
which is fair, which is good on NotSoDog for doing.
Well,
so,
I mean,
right?
NotSoDog, in his defense, he never mentions anyone by name. He always says my friend. He wants to make sure that he doesn't out anybody. But the thing about me is, I always felt like I was out. I was a public figure. I owned the Garden Spout, and everybody knew who I was, and I talked about weed all the time. So like I never felt like, and on top of that, giving me the nickname Staten Island, what a fucking insult. Like how about I got this friend from New York. So like everyone thinks New York is cool. Staten Island is a dump.
So here's the funny part about that is that what I think is very traditional in America, especially when you're a dude, is that your friend group gives you your nickname. And you don't choose it, right? And like I fully get that like you would have preferred a different nickname. I didn't call Gabby up and be like, hey, I'm gonna call you by a code word. Could we come up with an acceptable code word that you would find cool? Didn't do that at all. I being from the shadows for a long time, I just try to be very respectful because not everyone wants to show their face. Not everyone wants to be a forward figure. Not everyone wants their past talked about. And so if I leave it a little bit anonymous, that gives them the option to be like, hey, that's me, or it just stays anonymous. And
well, the thing is that nobody told me that the podcast had even happened. Like VA Skunk and Not So here, they didn't say, hey, Gabby, we just did a podcast and, we've been talking about you. And I referenced you as, that guy from Staten Island, now, okay, in NotSoDog and even VA Skunk's defense, me and NotSoDog, we didn't have a falling out. We just got distance because of distance. And I used to live up in Mendo with him, and we were super close. And then when I moved to Sonoma County, we saw less and less of each other, and we didn't talk so much. And so
I had 3 kids in 4 years.
So in NotSoDog's case, I don't think it was like an intentional, like trying to like keep me out of the picture. Now, with the other person that I mentioned, I don't really think he wanted me to have the spotlight. I don't think he wanted me to take away, the thunder that he was building, So that's why I think he didn't mention me. I don't think it was a matter of like trying to respect my privacy. But I mean, to be honest with you, if it wasn't for NotSoDog and if it wasn't for VA Skunk, I never would have started podcasting.
Wow.
And a story that I tell, or I haven't told publicly, I don't think, but people that know me from back in the day. So, I used to grow before I owned my grow store, obviously. And I used to go into this grow store called the Hydro Depot. And I used to hang out in the grow store and like talk to everybody, and the owner there was like, hey, do you want a job? And I never thought I wanted to work.
First of all, you've been hanging around the store too long. Hey, can we pay you?
Right, exactly. But I never thought I wanted a job at the point. And then I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take this job. I'm going to build my credit. I'm going to buy a home. And then I'm going to quit. I just want to use it as a vehicle to like, be able to get some credit and buy a home, right? But then I realized how much I love talking about cannabis. And like I think I can say I love talking about cannabis almost as much as I love growing it. And I love talking with people because I learn, and I love learning, and I love sharing and teaching. And so owning the garden spout, it was beautiful, and I was satisfied. And the garden spout's no longer now for over 10 years or something like that. And the podcasting has given me an opportunity to rekindle that love for talking about cannabis.
In a weird way.
To extend, wait, let me extend this, and I'll just give it back to you 1 second, because I'm going to talk about you. And one of the best parts is being able to do it with NotSoDog, because our friendship, like we've gotten close again. Like we haven't let the mileage. We talk now, and it makes me remember all those days when I would be at the shop with NotSoDog talking to people about growing. Like we have the best history together. And I'm going to be a little mushy now, but I fucking love this guy.
Oh man, that's yeah. I mean, one thing I'll say about the store is that a little bit like podcasting or like social media now, like, and you probably remember this, Chad, like stores used to be, if you had a cool one, it literally was where you could meet like-minded people. And like what Gaby was just saying about getting hired back then, if the owner saw somebody chatting it up and who the customers trusted, that was a giant component of having a good hydro store, was having someone come in and you're like, this guy is I trust this guy. He's one of us. He's legit. He's whatever. And that was a huge deal because we were secretive and we were, like the people don't get, I use this analogy, I use this thing a lot, but like people, when they grow up with like information available to them, they don't know how much information used to not be available or how hard it was to come by. You know what I mean? Like, you like really hard, like especially before the internet and stuff. I mean, you would just hear from older cats what to do. I used to take, this is the one that I always use, but I used to take my nicest nug and put it in my metal pipe resonating chamber. So that way, as I smoked, my nicest nug would be getting better and better. And then when I got down to it, I would have this hashish coated, glorious bud that I could finish. And it sounds preposterous now, but that was like some real heady weed tech that was passed down. That was like, that's why you laughed, right? Because everybody of a certain age knows what I'm talking about. And so you don't really realize. And then, the internet happened. And like one of the things about like this Gaby's store was like when NorCal really opened up, it was the first time that a bunch of people could come in and start sharing stories and start talking to each other and start networking. There was a lot of networking that went on, sometimes even in the parking lot, you're loading, like soil or what have you. And like, like you start chatting with someone, and that was really how information gets passed very quickly, but it did not then, in my opinion.
No, I was living early 2000 to 2003. I was down in Sonoma County, Santa Rosa area. And a lot of people would come down from NorCal, and I was working in the skate shops there in Petaluma and then also Santa Rosa. And it would be amazing when people would come in and their money would just even smell like weed. There was always this father-son combo. They'd come down every year. They'd buy a whole new surfboards. They'd buy the snowboards. They'd buy everything. And just like the money smells like weed. And those were the only kind of conversations I was able to get because I wasn't on the internet. I mean, this was kind of pre-internet-ish. But having those one-on-one conversations in the grow stores, a lot of people would usually say, a lot of people would know you're growing, but they didn't necessarily know how many lights you had. Like you could kind of confide like, I need this, I need that. they could suss it out by the amount of equipment you're buying sometimes, but I never really specifically was like, oh, I've got 20 lights.
Mendocino was a really unique place where people were more willing to open up about this shit too. Like, I think even Humboldt, everyone was still really secretive and not talking, but like where we were, like, and in Santa Rosa, nobody was talking. I have this story about, like, one of my best friends didn't know I was growing, and he showed up to my house unannounced, and I freaked out on him because he's just like, he was just being friendly. He knew where I lived. He was in the neighborhood, you know, but I didn't even tell my close friends then that I grew. No. In Mendocino, it was really like more of a community, and people knew. It was. But, you know, Chad, one of the reasons why I asked you if it was okay if NotSoDog came on the show, not only so I can get high and not feel like, right, but also I love him telling stories, and he was telling the stories about, like, you know, people's trust and stuff. And if I can ask NotSoDog to tell the story about Tony Mendo, aka Mr. Skittles, but, you know, I love, like, this was before the Garden Spout. NotSoDog owned a head shop in Willits, and because he was kind of straight-laced looking.
Well, here, let me tell the story because it gets ahead of it. So I opened up a head shop,
and I'm gonna get high.
I was a hippie and I had connections to glass blowers, and I opened up a head shop in Willits. And it was pretty funny in the sense that, like, it was considered vice at the time. So I had to, like, I couldn't be within a certain distance of a school or a church. Wow. And at 22, I had to, like, go in front of the city council and convince them that we were going to open this store, and it wasn't going to be like smut. We weren't going to have, like, you know, giant glass dildos or anything. Like, they were concerned, you know? And so
what's the big dildo?
What they allowed us to do was that they allowed us to have a store in the front with all of your normal dead hippie stuff, like, you know, incense and tapestries and some clothing and some whatevers. And then you would have, like, the bead, you know, curtains that you walked through. And in the very back, we could have, like, our little head shop, you know, type of thing. And so I would, you know, I was hustling glass or whatever. And I met these dudes and I kind of vibed with them a little bit. And so sometimes after work, I would just lock the shop and we would go in the back, you know, because it was all whatever, and we would just get stoned. So I invited these dudes back there one day, and we ended up smoking, I don't know, I think the Mendo Perps and this thing I had at the time called the Crystal Chunk and a few different strains. And that guy is now known as Tony Mendo. Okay, the from you know, Skittles and Z fame and all that, right? So Tony Mendo worked for this guy named Tony Sasso, who was a big player hustler up here that he's since passed away. But anyway,
the biggest.
He was a seriously major player. His whole story is really crazy. But anyway, so I'm a kid, you know, early 20s. I'm in this park, and I'm like, I had this Australian Shepherd at the time, and I'm like throwing a freaking frisbee for her, you know, we're playing, and this old man sits down next to me. And what I mean by old man, it's like our age. Right? But,
totally.
You know, but I'm 23 or something, right? So it's like, you know, like you sit down next to a 23-year-old, he might look next to you and be like, who's this old man, right? So this old man sits down next to me, and he's like, you know, this is fucked up, but everybody in town was like thought you were a fucking cop. And then Tony tells me that you have better weed than I grow. How the fuck does some young kid that looks like you have better weed than us? He didn't introduce himself. He didn't say who he was. I had no idea that it was like this full-on man.
That's a G right there.
With literally just like, who the fuck? And then I realized that they thought that I was like a young, fresh out of police academy plant, that they had opened up this head shop to get to know growers, because Willits, before the green rush and before 215 really blew up, was a very insulated, like, place, you know. It was not and like growing and stuff like that was highly illegal, and people were very insulated about that kind of thing. And so I guess they had this big debate, because I gave Tony, he, you know, he likes this story too, I gave Tony some nugs to take home. And so he smoked them with his boss and his buddies, and they had this big conversation, and they were basically like, cops don't have weed this good. We should find out who this kid is, right?
Real.
And then I got to meet everybody. And it was like I was being segregated from the population without realizing it because they were worried about who I was. Right? And the good weed was just an end. So literally like a random act of kindness of like, do you want to get buzzed with me after the shop closes? Turned into like I ended up meeting all these different underground people.
Including me. That's how we met too.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
So well when he worked at the Hydro Depot in I would go down there because like people don't, when I first moved to Mendo, okay, this sounds nuts, but the nearest hydro store, and what I mean by hydro store is just a place where you could buy lights or bulbs or any of the accoutrements that you kind of need to like, function. Mm-hmm. The nearest one was the Berkeley Garden Center. Was that its name, Gaby?
Damn.
Berkeley Indoor. Well,
Berkeley Indoor.
There was one that was closer. It was in San Rafael.
No, so there was the Berkeley
Diamond Lights. When I moved to California in
Diamond Lights
1991, there was Diamond Lights in San Rafael.
I didn't even know they existed. So yeah. I would either
they made their own lights there.
Then there was American Hydroponics in Eureka. But where I lived in Mendo, Eureka and Berkeley were both about 3 hours away. So then this guy that used to work at Berkeley Indoor, he opened up a shop in Novato. And then this other guy named Slavic, who's tied into those guys, he opened up a shop in Rosa, which is where Gaby ended up working.
Runner Park.
But basically, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That area of Sonoma. And so that's where I met Gaby. And I have this friend, well, Gaby and I have this close friend of mine that I grew up with that sadly died a long time ago. But we had bought these water-cooled lights from Australia, and they were like $400 or $500 a piece, and we kept breaking them because we didn't realize they weren't designed to fit inside any American hoods. And so we would like take them home and try to we were like drilling holes in hoods. And so finally we got so frustrated that like we went down to talk to Gaby about it, and like the dudes were from Australia, so like they were sleeping during normal business hours.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have to call them at like midnight to get them on the phone. And then we realized that like those guys ran like open wing hoods. Remember those? Like just the basic, like, the basic wings. But they didn't sell any of those. And so my buddy Sean and I, we spent so much time trying to figure this shit out with Gaby that Sean was like, that guy Gaby's nice. We should leave him a joint and our number. And so literally we rolled a joint of the Mendo P, and we left him a joint of the Mendo P on his fucking windshield wiper with our number.
Wow. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Mr. Nice Guy right there.
And
bro,
we were like all sketched out because it's like we were like making like an olive branch offering to like the grow store guy, And then he called us. And he was like, dude, this weed is incredible. He was like, this tastes incredible. Like, oh my God. And we basically were friends since.
The Mendo Perps is what, and you know what's ironic about that is the Mendo Perps is what made us friends. But in like a lot of cases, or most cases for me, when it came to weed, it was the Chem 91 that was making me friends, not the other way around. So the Mendo Perps.
Well, and we brought, and the thing is Gaby had this.
And by the way, NotSoDog gave the really abridged version, because the way I remember it, I mean, I remember you bought the water-cooled lights, but I remember the story of the airflow.
That was later.
That
was actually after we'd broken the ice and stuff. But that was when you had the shop in Hopland.
Yeah.
But the funny part about that is that like it just goes to show like how you had your small group of friends that you trusted, and everyone outside of that was viewed with a little bit of sususpicion. You weren't really sure.
Reasonably so.
Yeah, you weren't really sure.
It's
You
protective.
didn't really know, especially if you're a grower. I mean, when I lived in Chicago, that same friend Sean, he didn't grow at the time. I would sell him my weed, and then we would be at parties together, and I would buy a quarter off him at the party in front of like 10 people, because that way I could have, I could smoke it, right? And everyone's just like, they saw me spend $100.
Yeah.
So of course I'm not a grower.
Smart.
You know, like,
it was
so
always my friend. You know,
like,
it was
yeah,
always
like
my friend I got it from.
you know, because it's like back then, it's like if somebody got in trouble, if you knew a grower, that's a get out of jail free card. You just tell the cop, like, oh, I can, you know, like,
right.
yeah. So it was like, you know, so it was like it was really like, people don't realize the level of like fear or sketch, or like how much personal relationships mattered.
Well, like I said, I didn't tell one of my closest friends. Oh, by the way, you know who that story is about? NotSoDog? Because you know this person. It was Brian.
No shit.
He later on ended up working for me, you know, and knowing everything. But at that point, like, I didn't tell him shit.
But it's interesting because it's like herb has gone in stages. You know what I mean? Like in terms of like just like the culture and like how you got into it, how you learned. You know, it was like if you were gonna grow, it was, you know, it's like maybe you had a few books, maybe you had one buddy that knew something, you know, and like he knew more than you. It just seemed like learning like some kind of like magical trade that was like almost impossible to get information about.
Yeah. I mean, look at how comfortable we are now just talking about it. Even exactly what we're doing today, this would not have happened years ago, decades ago. It would have been maybe in the back room of the shop, make sure, you know, nobody's around, nobody's looking, but it was never this public. And you did always have to kind of have that person introduce you into it. And that always kind of formed the tighter bonds. But it is kind of crazy. You mentioned, you know, the get out of jail free card. Because yeah, there still are serious consequences, but back then it was easier to put the squeeze on a person back then.
You're talking about in Illinois?
Yeah.
Like, you would go to jail for a long time.
I can still remember off the top of my head, bro. Like literally
like little shit.
49 plants to 99 plants was 5 to 7 years in state penitentiary and a $50,000 fine. Damn. Over 100 was an automatic mandatory minimum, 5 years in the clink. I think it was like 48 to 30 or something was like 3 to 5. You know, it was like I mean I had a whole like, it was basically like, yeah, like any amount.
You knew the price. You knew the price of playing.
Any amount was jail time. And like, and what's crazy, okay, so this is kind of a funny story. I think I've told it before, but it's like, it's funny enough, it's worth doing. In Illinois back then, you could not get paraphernalia of any kind. I mean, I'm to the point where like, if a gas station sold raw tobacco with rolling papers, the cops would probably hassle them incessantly about the papers.
Wow.
It was really harsh. You were not allowed to sell paraphernalia anytime. So Chicago is about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes away from the Wisconsin border. Okay. And there's this place in Wisconsin called Kenosha. All right. The town of Kenosha. And Kenosha had some pretty liberal laws, and they had this sex shop called Superb Video. Okay. Which was like,
NotSoDog was very familiar with this place.
And so this place, what's funny about this place was hilarious because, like, you can look it up or whatever, but like Superb, it had a giant porn shop in the front. And then if you walked all the way through it, in the very back, they would have a head shop. They didn't sell glass, but they would have wood pipes, ceramic pipes, stone pipes. You could buy, remember like the graphics where you could get it cut by the foot? And you pick your sticker and they would put the base on and a little metal.
I don't remember that. I always went to the stores that already had them cut, I guess.
No, they would literally, like, not all stores, like they would sell them cut, but you could get a custom if you wanted.
It was just a PVC tube. I imagine it'd be super easy just to cut, get the color cut
or whatever, right? But the funniest thing about this place was that, okay, so you know how I mentioned at the head shop, we had like the classic hippie glass beads that you like pushed your way through to get to the back section. Superb Video had like several layers of those, but they had taken all the beads out and they had drilled holes through the center of dildos and then hung them vertically. So like when you walked in, you had to like basically push your way through a wall of dicks, like for lack of a better way to put it. You literally had to like push through, and then you were into like this.
And wait, so when NotSoDog opened up his head shop in Willits, he had to prove to them that his chain thing wasn't going to be made out of dicks.
But just to say, like, we had to, in order for us to get paraphernalia of any kind, we had to leave the state we were in.
Damn.
And go to a different state. Right?
That presents its own problem right there, though. Interstate.
And then it's like if you lost your shit, you know, like losing your pipe or losing your whatever, that was a big deal. Because now you're hours away. Now you got to work out with your buddy, like how we're gonna get gas money. We're gonna drive up to there. We're gonna do this whole thing. You know, it was so like people.
I had the complete opposite experience in New York, because even though I'm older than you, you know, when I was of that age in New York, there was always a million head shops, and they sold everything. They sold crack pipes. Yeah, they fucking sold everything. And, you know, like, to quickly tell another head shop story, when I moved from New York to California, I moved to Sonoma County, and I went to this head shop, and I'll give them a shout out because they've been around that long, the Mighty Quinn.
Yeah,
I've shopped there.
Yeah. And I walked into the place, and I asked the guy for a bong.
And they threw you out.
He not only did he throw me out, like he fucking like his brain was just like, you could see I was gonna give this guy a heart attack. You know, like he was so stressed out that I had called it a bong. But like when I was in New York, you could call it a bong. Here you have to call it a water pipe.
For
water pipes.
For people that don't know, the reason why that was that a water pipe could technically be used for tobacco consumption, you know, like, or a hookah or whatever. But if you said bong, that connotated herb, which meant that if Gaby was, say, like an undercover, and the dude was like, hey, I've got bongs, well, then they could raid the shop and be like, you're knowingly selling drug paraphernalia.
Well, this was just after like the whole Tommy Chong thing, I think, and
the Operation Green Merchant.
Well, Operation Green
that was
Merchant,
80s, mid 80s, right?
No, but Operation Green Merchant was the gross
head shop rating.
But then
Tom Alexander
Tommy Chong got messed up with like the pipes stuff.
I think that was a little later.
Yes, later. He went to jail for his son.
So the reason why I know that is that was during the Bush administration. So okay, just to take a step back for a second.
Hold on. Let me just finish my Mighty Quinn story, and I'll move on. I'll take 1 second. And then I would see that same guy who yelled at me, like for calling it a bong, at every Grateful Dead show I ever went. I was like, that's the fucking guy from the Mighty Quinn that yelled at me for saying bong, and he's still there. That guy is still there.
Cool,
he doesn't even own the place. He's cool. He's cool. It's just that was like a sensitive subject. Don't call it a bong.
Well, it's because if the store acknowledged that they sold bongs, then they were selling illegal drug paraphernalia, and the whole business could get raided and shut down. So what you're thinking of, Gaby, is the pipe thing exploded.
Pipe dreams, and
everything got loose. And people started making real money, and Jerome Baker and all these different glass blowers from Oregon and all these different people, and head shops were sprouting up everywhere, and things got pretty loose. And then during the first George Bush administration, which I think was in the early 2000s, he had this attorney general called John Ashcroft, and they did this thing called Operation Pipe Dreams, where they hammered everyone selling paraphernalia across state lines, which at the time was almost everybody. And that was like, the first like bankrupting wave of like early glass blowers that all got smashed, and certain people caught cases. And because at the time on the books, if it was, you know, drug paraphernalia was illegal, felonious even, you know.
like I don't know about like you guys, but just an observation, we're far enough removed from it. But glass was one area where people who were doing weight would put their money because they couldn't put it in the bank. They couldn't buy expensive things like on the books. They would buy expensive glass as like an investment, and that would kind of hold some value. So I kind of honestly think that helped that whole glass scene explode because a lot of people banked there.
This is a really funny story, but like the first person
I
I
have
ever
sad
saw,
ones.
the first person I ever saw blowing glass was Snodgrass on Dead Tour. You know, he would blow it out of the back of his vehicle. You know, he would set up this thing. They would have big blankets laid out, and you could buy your little top hats and little stuff like that. And it was, I mean, by today's standards, it looked like a child made it or something. It was kind of rudimentary, like,
Right.
but it was amazing. I mean, he did do some cool stuff. Gabby used to have this steamroller, right?
Yes.
That like it came through and it had the dragon mouth like in the steamroller, and so like as you smoke through the bowl, the flame would come out of the dragon mouth and go towards you and stuff.
Wow.
And I remember I was in Florida, like my buddies and I, we went to Florida to party, and basically like take hippie substances and go to like, Disney World and like, and like,
Yes.
and the various things like that. And so I'm walking down the street in down there, and I see this store and it says 100% snotties
In Florida?
in Florida. And I'm like, did somebody move from Oregon to Florida? It's like, is this one of like his family members or something like that? So I go in there and it's all glass pipes. And I'm like looking around and I'm like, hey man, it says it's 100% snotties, but I don't see any snodgrass working here. And he's like, oh, it's all snotties. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, it's glass. And I realized that like at that point in time, glass was so associated with snodgrass that by saying 100% snotty, it meant that the shop was all glass work.
Wow.
None of it was from Snodgrass. None of it was from any of those like small group of glass blowers that came out of Eugene or anything like that. Because Bob Batcham, all those guys were kind of like, if you're a certain age hippie, that was the shit to have. Did you have a Snodgrass? Did you have a Batcham? Did you have a, did you have a this, And but they in Florida, they just considered glass pipes were snotties. That was the word for glass pipe.
So right now, every word that NotSoDog says is almost like a knife in my heart. He's like,
Why is it a knife in your heart? What's the connection? It seems a little personal here.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with NotSoDog. But I lost my entire glass collection in the fires here in 2017.
Gabby had an entire big case of Snodgrass work,
because
the top hats, the steamrollers.
I was one of the first people, and this isn't, I mean, maybe it's going to come off as a brag, but it's just a fact. I was one of the first people that was selling Snodgrass glass on tour that wasn't a Snodgrass.
Wow.
Like in their family. I used to buy so much glass off of them and just resell it. And the only thing I ever wanted was to get the prize pieces out of the case first. I never even I don't think I ever even really made money on the glass because I spent so much on it all the time. But to put it in perspective, when you're talking about banking the glass, that piece that NotSoDog was called The Dragon in the Tube. And it was made by Bob Snodgrass and Bob Batcham. Bob Batcham was, if you know who he is, he was making the most I don't want to say realistic, but for this type of glass work, he would paint pictures of trees and a forest scene. And that was combined with Snodgrass. And I paid $1,500 for that Dragon in the Tube, which at the time was insane.
Yeah.
It was the fact that I was paying that was absolutely irresponsible, or
you had some
I had a little
disposable cash.
I had some disposable cash, right? But I had to wait
as far as like a hippie goes,
I had to wait like a year and a half to get that thing.
Oh damn!
You know, because it was custom made, and he would say, "I got to be in the right." You know,
it's art. It is art, though.
But also, it was complicated to put it together.
Having one of those is like having a nice Owsley belt buckle.
Beyond, there's so many more Owsley belt buckles by 100 times, bro.
Yeah,
there wasn't that many of them. There's like maybe 10, 15 at the most. Owsley belt buckles, there's hundreds of them.
That's true.
You know, like that piece of glass alone, I think would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars today. He doesn't make that shit anymore. And fuck. Just and I had
sorry to hear this.
Fucking knife in the heart. But I have pictures, and I have to find them, of the melted glass, and you can still see some of the artwork, particularly from Bob Batcham, like those trees and stuff that he did. So it's crazy. And so I haven't been able to like invest in glass ever since that happened. You know, this is just
I mean, you are still able to get some things from some of the legends like that, but just in general, I mean, the little chillum that I have here, I can pick up for $5 down at the head shop, whereas when glass first came around to me, this same thing would have been in that briefcase with the foam on the back of the car, and it would have been $50-$60. So generically speaking, the price of glass has gone down. But I don't think, unless somebody's seen some of this work or has actually been lucky enough to hold it in their hands and get the light to change on different things, it's hard, I think, for someone to truly appreciate the difference. You know, some just look at the form. They're like, $100, $10,000. The hell?
Yeah. So, I mean, nowadays, the art in glass has just gotten way crazier on pipes even than the Snodgrass stuff. But like Snodgrass was the original. And I mean, everyone will always consider him the OG. And I want to grab something.
I think when this kind of ties into what we were talking about with like grow stores and cannabis. Everybody gets to come in and stand on like who came before. On the shoulders of who came before, and they get to learn and advance from. I mean, just to take it back to straight canna, think about if you were an aspiring grower and somebody put in the late 70s or early 80s, somebody put Rob Clark's marijuana botany in front of you. And just explained, and like all of a sudden you read this book. And you're like, and you start hearing concepts of like how it flowers, how it works. Like we take all this information for granted now, but people had to learn it. And then they could advance what people had taught them before. And then people could come along and advance what taught them before. But it's like somebody had to figure that out. Somebody had to put it down. Somebody had to start spreading that information out. Right. And, I mean, like that, so to us,
can I interrupt Francis for a minute?
Sure.
You need a second, Chad?
No, it's just you're mentioning this, and I just found this the other week at a thrift store. I found an old Sensibilia Tips magazine.
That's a killer. That's a good time. Yeah, I mean, because people would. One of the coolest things about working at the grow store in Mendocino County specifically during the boom, was that I would say honestly that Gaby and I were both pretty experienced gardeners. But when you worked at the store, you got to help thousands of growers sort out their problems. You got to hear struggles. You got to work out issues, and then they would come back and give you feedback on whether or not it worked or not, right? And like that moved forward, like the level of education, the internet. Like now, if you want to if you want to learn how to grow, there's so many resources, it's preposterous,
Nice.
But like like, or even people like during the forum era, they could go and they could be like, hey man, this is going on with my plants, like, what do you think? And they could post pictures.
That's not me.
Not me either. But
no.
But now it's like, but back in the day, it was like maybe you'd ask a couple of friends, like maybe you'd like, it was just like, you can look at it and you can be like, oh, that's rudimentary, but like, things start rudimentary and then they have to grow and then they have to get tested by people and then things have to change. I mean, it's like things get exponential, right? Like in terms of knowledge, like I remember the first time I heard the name Elaine Ingram, and we were like, oh, we're going to learn about making teas. We're going to learn about biology.
What is this?
We're going to learn about microbes and like what they do, and so it's like that kind of stuff. It's hard to explain to people now, like how slow the process was.
I mean, I didn't have that mentor, and this was really before a lot of the information that's easily available now was out there. I mean, obviously we had Robert Connell Clark's book, but I had to use a lot of just traditional agriculture. Like I can't tell you, well, I can, but I fed 20 Miracle Grow for the longest time because that's what tomatoes like, right? We're talking tomatoes. So it takes people who are curious. But like you said, it takes so much more information because I can only grow so much. I can only do so many per year. But when you start outsourcing and crowdsourcing that learning, that's when a lot of these advancements are really made, to your point.
Yeah. And then those things can be,
Let me respond to what he just said, or what you guys have been saying. I got high, so I was like not able to interject as often as I would. I mean, I love that NotSoDog will always fill in for me when I'm stoned, but every now and again I gotta just tell him to shut up for a second so I don't forget what I was
get squirrely.
No, just so I don't forget what I was gonna say. But so it was pretty what he's saying about, like, for instance, the book, right? You can read a book and get a lot of information from it, but you can't ask a book questions, and you can't tell the book like, hey, I did what you said, but this is still happening, or this. And so, it's funny because when you own a grow store or when you work at a grow store, at first people are really suspicious of you, and like the idea of them being cops and shit like that. But then we built trust with so many people, like one of the proudest things that, like, for me in cannabis, like people know of me as, for the Chem 91 story, but like one of the things that I'm most proud of is that NotSoDog and I would teach OGs that had been growing in the hills for decades, how to grow indoors, because they wanted to get away from these helicopters, and they wanted to be able to grow the better weed and more year round. And so we taught so many, I mean, I want to say thousands, I don't know, but we taught so many,
I would say thousands.
Because it goes on from 1 to 2 to 4 to,
Right.
Well, it was also, there was this thing. It was
definitely hundreds of thousands, if not millions of watts of light.
There was this thing that happened. It was called Measure G. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Chad, but there was this thing that was passed in Mendo by the by the local government for Mendocino County, and it was called Measure G, and it basically was the most liberal pot law in the country in terms of growing. Okay. And so that opened up the floodgates where it was like people would come here thinking it was legal.
Right? Is that where you could have 25 plants per property?
Yes.
Okay.
And they even got to a point where they would you would get like yellow zip ties with codes on them from the sheriff's department. Like my ex I don't talk about
sketch.
this. I don't talk about this that much. But my ex had the reason why I moved to California is my ex got cancer in Illinois. Okay, and Illinois was basically like Darwin out there, right? There was no like insurance thing. It was like we'd come up with the money, figure it out or not, right? And so
Yeah.
she was going through all this chemo and stuff, and she was losing a lot of weight. You know, chemo was really crushing her as far as nausea and all that. And um, strangely, we had this old man who was he was an actual old man, but he was old Catholic cancer doctor, and we had tried every pill, everything, nothing was keeping it down. And he looked at us, and we were like literally dead tour hippie kids, right? And he was like, "Do you guys smoke weed?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Does she smoke weed?" And I'm like, "Some." And he's like, "What if she just smoked a bunch of weed before the chemo treatment?" Okay.
Wow.
So we started, so we would wake up in the morning and we would watch Bob Barker on The Price is Right.
Yes.
And we would literally I would roll joints and we would pull tubes and we would tough puff at like 7, 8 a.m. up until the chemo treatment. And she stopped vomiting.
They didn't think about edibles at that point. Right?
And so,
or RSO, or amazing.
I hadn't even heard the word RSO. In that era, I hadn't heard the word CBD.
No.
You know, I had no fucking idea, dude. None. I had no idea.
But it's just like pretty like for a doctor to say, smoke as much as you fucking can.
Very progressive.
All the prescription anti-nausea medication, and for any women or any men.
Do you know that doctor's name? Not that we want to call him out, but the thing is, like, what a fucking hero.
He worked at Alexian Brothers Hospital.
He's a hero.
And
like, everyone should know, like, not to like put him on blast and get him in trouble, but it's like,
oh, he's dead.
Well, great then.
I mean, either that or he's like 102. You know what I mean?
Everybody should know, like, that guy's a hero.
Pioneering.
And so he had put us on and so if people know things about size, Amy was a size 9.
Okay.
When he gave me this advice, she was a size 00.
Oh no.
That's how much weight she was wasting away. And we had tried all the prescription anti-nausea medication first. He had given us all the scripts, we had tried all these different things. Nothing fucking worked. We'd worked, surprisingly. And so what's funny about that is I had a buddy of mine from Dead Tour that lived north of Ukiah, if you know where that is, right? In Mendocino County. And he calls me up one day and he's like, "Bro, we just passed this thing called 215 and your lady has cancer, and like there's like 5 conditions that you can get weed." And he's like, "She's one of them. You should come here. Like you can grow weed here and they wouldn't get you in trouble. There's no way a jury here would be like."
Right.
And so I literally, when I moved out here, because Amy was undergoing chemo and all this different stuff, this is going to sound crazy to people, but not only did we have medical, we had medical that was vetted through the Mendocino County Department of Health. And I had a card from the Sheriff's Department of Mendocino County that I was a vetted medical marijuana patient, and like cops could call that number and the dispatch for the sheriff would pick up and be like, "Yep, they're allowed to have 2 pounds on them. They're this, they're that." Because back then there was only 5 things. I think it was like glaucoma, cancer, HIV, serious end of life chronic pain, and something else.
Wow.
Well, she had cancer, you know. We had surgeries, we had chemotherapy treatments, we had migraines, right? Well, I had migraines since I was about 15. So Amy and I both got vetted through the County Department of Health. And what's crazy about that is right after, when we were talking about pipe dreams a little while ago, the Bush administration got so mad at Mendocino County that they were like, "You're going to turn over your lists of all the medical marijuana patients because we don't want this happening."
That's scary.
And our sheriff and district attorney was such a badass at the time They shut it down and burned all the information rather than give it to the feds. They refused.
Legends. They need a plaque in a park somewhere for that.
Tony Craver was the sheriff then. He said, "Come arrest me. I'm not giving up sick people. I don't care."
Is there a Tony Craver Park?
There's not.
There needs to be. Seriously,
Tony Craver was Tony Craver was.
How often is it that like the public is calling for like some type of monument to the cops? Like that's just like good PR for everybody. Like you think the cops would be like, yeah. Like I mean,
so Tony Craver was the sheriff, and this guy named Norm Vroman was the district attorney, and they decided between each other that there was a difference between sick people, mom and pops just trying to make a little money in a crappy rural area that was kind of poor, and people blowing it up and going for it.
There is a difference.
So they would go after people blowing it up. But if you got caught with 50 plants and 8 lights in your garage or 30 plants in your backyard, they really didn't give a shit. You know, like if they found guns or meth or this or that, like extenuating stuff, then they'd be like, well, maybe you're a dirtbag. But if you're just like a normal person, they would just be. And so as a result of that, Mendo became sort of like a mecca. And it started spreading through the weed community that this place was pretty free and pretty cool. Okay. And Gaby had just opened up his shop a few years later. And so when that flood, we call it the green rush, but when the flood started coming in of people, right, they were like, all of a sudden there was this place that was, that was welcoming. And it was the first place in America really that was I'm not saying Humboldt and these other places don't have long histories. I'm just saying that like the political climate in Mendo for this period of time brought a lot of people in because they were like, oh, I can have a small or medium sized scene and raise a family and not live in fear. I'm moving to Mendo. Right.
And there was always the understanding that like the feds weren't going to move in if you weren't big too. So like, so it used to be like, the city and county, like they were going after the small growers and then, the DEA were going after the big growers. So now it was like, all right, as long as we keep it small, they're not going to fuck with us.
And you could still get wrapped up in interstate or this or that, or you could still draw, like I used to call the feds the eye of Sauron, like you could still get the eye shining on you, but it was, that thing that I was just talking about, Measure G, that set the conditions for the flood to sort of come in and be like, we can grow weed here. And then what happened after that was actually really interesting because there'd been for a long time in Humboldt and Mendo like an undercurrent of growers, right? But there was such a flood in Humboldt and Mendo and Trinity to some extent that it was almost like became the first place in America where like there was like weed culture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't mean like other places didn't have culture. I just meant like you could come over to your family, to a friend's house for a barbecue with your kids, right? And a bunch of growers were there and it was normal and the kids went to school and it was normal and it wasn't like this weird stigma you had to like be terrified of and hide. It like, that's what I mean by like culturally it started to bubble up and be more normal, like people stopped living in fear.
Yeah, cultural in the sense too of just farming. That is the life because there is multiple generations up there that have been doing this, even prior to the G. And just as an example, and again, I've never lived there, but I've known a lot of people from there. So you have firsthand experience, but just look at the economy of the places now. When you talk about how big of the culture was there versus what it is today when we actually have a weed culture, right? So there is a distinction.
Yeah. One thing that you just mentioned is when I moved to Mendo, it was post-logging collapse, right?
Okay.
And logging was the big economic driver of the area. All right. So Mendo was pretty much dirt poor. Yeah. There wasn't an economic base there. Like that's also what made it affordable to a bunch of broke hippies. Is like you could get like a rundown farmhouse on 40 acres on the top of a hill for like a couple $100,000 owner will carry. You know what I mean? And like make a handshake deal with an old man and give him a bag of cash and start having land, you know? And so it was a combination of like Mendo being dirt poor, right? And like everything being affordable, right? It changed over time. Obviously, like the more demand happened, the more you could get for properties and the more they started going up. And then hippies did this weird thing. Like you were talking about how like people would bank their money into glass or something. The most traditional Mendo thing ever was like the indoor comes in. Okay, honey, we're going to remodel the bathroom. The next indoor comes in. Okay, honey, we're going to put flooring in the kitchen, right? The outdoor comes in. Ooh, that's a little bit more. Baby, we're going to redo the roof. And so, like, I shit you not, but like thousands of properties up here, every time a crop came in, the people that lived there would make it a little nicer.
Why not?
And so
Right?
they started putting their money. And so then all of a sudden it was like, you know, not only the grocery store was booming, but like the hardware stores were booming. You know what I mean? Like the local tradesmen, the plumbers, you know,
the guys that sold the lifted trucks,
the roofers, the framers and stuff like that. They were like, "Hey dude, you know, do you mind? I got a job here, you know, like," and they come out and they bid the job and the dude's like, "Do you mind if I pay you cash?"
Right.
And like and the framer would be like, "Sure, I'll build you a garage." 100% for cash, you know? And so it's just sort of, it started like stimulating the economy, like in a way. And it went from like kind of like a dirt poor rural backwater, right? Where there just wasn't an economic engine to like a serious economic engine where, like Gaby was saying, trucks are flying off the lot, restaurants are popping up. You know what I mean? Like schools are full of kids, you know? You know, all that kind of stuff was just starting to happen. And so the green rush really took a region of California that was like on the downturn. And you know, they say like rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't involved in the industry, the restaurant was probably there because of the industry. Everything was booming because of the industry. Like if you sold cars, you were stoked on that.
If you sold big trucks, you were killing it.
Everybody who sold cars waited for that fall money to come in.
Yeah.
You know,
and they come from the hills.
Yeah, and then like I need a truck. I need a trailer. You know, I need a nice trailer to move soil or to move stuff around. This is actually kind of funny, I suppose. But you know how like U-Hauls, no matter how big of a U-Haul you get, it's pretty much the same size truck on the front, right? So they have like a weight limit. We would have dudes that would show up with like a 24-foot truck, and they'd be like, you know, how many pallets of ocean forest can I fit in this thing? And it would end up being like Gaby and I would be like, well, yeah, you're going to go like double or triple over the rated weight limit of the truck. Yeah. And they're like, that's fine. I only need to take it there and back. You know?
Oh, and when they say there and back, I mean, I can tell a story because we had, I think it was just like a 12, through streams,
14 feet.
Yeah. So we had a box truck that we used to deliver the soil, and they're like, oh, it's no problem. And then we'd show up and then we're like, holy shit. Yeah. And like, once you get going,
driveway like this,
it's a rutted out goat trail.
Yeah. Like looking like what you see on those videos sometimes, you know, like, and you get to a point where you can't turn around.
Yeah.
Because we are driving a box truck, the roads narrow down, and you're like, holy shit, I'm gonna die falling off the edge of this mountain tonight trying to deliver this guy's soil.
And it happened more than once. You're flooring it so you can go 15 miles an hour.
The truck wasn't that strong
because the truck wasn't designed. It's designed to like move houses, which is full of relatively light stuff like couches and chairs and boxes and this, and not like 11 pallets of wet ocean forest. You know,
we never took 11. 4 was concrete. Like crazy. Yeah.
And so, you know, it just created like there was like a, you know, like I remember when I first moved up here, okay, there was a guy that I worked for and he had this truck and it was like old and dinged up and had rust, you know, whatever. It just looked like a beat up old truck, right? And then he pops the hood for me one day and like the engine is like juiced, everything's chrome, right? Everything's perfect. And he looked at me and he said, in Willits, it's important to look poor. Right? So he had a gorgeous truck. Like the suspension was killer, the engine was killer, everything on the interior was killer. But the external was kind of rusty and dinged up because when he drove around town, he didn't want to flash that he was wealthy because it was a kind of a poor area that was small and everyone sort of knew everyone.
I lived in a little bit of a larger place, but I drove a minivan for many years for that exact reason. It's like, who's pulling over the minivan?
Yeah. Look, you know, like look like a, you know, like you want to be
don't stick out, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, it's like that. Don't stick out.
One of my mentors on Dead Tour, he told me that the only superpower we actually have is being invisible. Right? And that people, we actually, we had a different podcast yesterday that was like on women and weed or whatever, but like, and this kind of got brought up, but it was like, it's like people are going to look at you just naturally and they're going to judge you in the first 3 to 5 seconds they see you.
Yep.
Right? He's like, so
natural.
You know, he's like, you're just gonna, he's like, and so what my mentor told me was, he's like, you just need to look completely normal. Right? Like boring. Don't have a steal your
Nothing
face
remarkable
on the side of your neck, you know, or even like how you look with the big, you know, the beard.
Oh yeah,
like,
this
like all that.
I'm like, pull me over, right? I've got the steely on. I got
but like that, you know, it's like dancing bear stickers on the back of your, you know, like there's a million things where it's like he's like, look invisible.
So NotSoDog looked like a cop on the lot.
I did.
Right?
I looked totally normal, but he was like that.
Wearing khakis and...
But he's like, dude, if you're flying around, like, okay, so this is actually, I won't tell why, but I would fly back from San Francisco in an era a long time ago, okay? And in order to look completely like a dork, I would have Dockers on. I would have a polo shirt on. I would have boat shoes on. And I would, in my backpack, I bought off a kid from Stanford all of, you know, because you know how like when you go to college, they make you buy really expensive books and then you have to sell them back for much cheaper, right?
Right.
I bought all this kid's books for way more than he could sell them back. That he didn't need anymore. All of his notebooks, all of his stuff. So when I would fly, I would be like loaded down with something shady, right? But if I put my backpack through the thing, it was like they opened it up and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm just going back to see my folks." And it's like, "Oh, there's Stanford this, Stanford that. There's this calculus, there's that." I'm just a dorky college student. And most people are going to judge you in that first 3 to 5 seconds, for better or for worse. And so my buddy was always like, "You just want their eyes to pass over you." You know, he's like, "You just want to look." He's like, and it'll be hard because then you're not signaling to your subculture that you're not wearing patchwork pants, you know, you don't have a big steely, you know, like on your arm, you don't have long hair with fucking, you know, glass beads woven into it, you know, you don't have dreads, like you're gonna look like a dork, or like Gaby said, like a cop. But he's like, you'd rather look like a cop to everyone else than like a mark to a cop. Like, I should fuck with that guy. He probably has something on him, you know? And now people don't care, you know, because it's hard to tell someone that's 25 the level of fear that we had when we were 25.
There's less consequences, 100%. Less consequences.
It's hard.
There still are consequences, but they're far less.
And cops are far less interested in.
That's true too.
It was like when we were young,
right? But you know, kids can get involved in much worse shit, you know. So like, they can still get in trouble. And
I'm just saying that, like, in general, people aren't like, this weed in my pocket could send me to prison.
Oh yeah. Unless you're in Texas. If you're in Texas.
I was just going to say, to flip it to Texas, that actually is the first time where I've had those like pit of the stomach, oh my God feelings, because it's now, I think like a gram is 6 months in jail. Can you fucking, what?
Before this show started, Chad was like, yeah, we do everything here except for politics. And now we're talking politics, but
which is fine.
But we're talking herb politics.
Yeah,
okay.
but
yeah, which is good, which is fine.
But that's what I mean is it's like there are, and I'm not going to defend Texas because I think the shit's draconian and crazy. But I just imagine if you're Texas and you do not have rec and you do not have medical even, and then all of a sudden they found this loophole where they can sell vapes and Delta 9 THC and Delta 8 and gummies and all this different stuff and fake hemp, and there's nothing you can do about it. They decided to crack down and smash all these loopholes.
It's why we can't have nice things. And I fully understand that. And I was not happy with the whole THCA game because, again, it's why we can't have nice things. It's why the medical system in Washington collapsed. When it went adult use, I was already a med patient. I was in that system and I knew it was going to collapse the med system. And that was there and it was working for patients much better than the adult use system is working now. So sorry, I get a little passionate and I forgot where I was going with that. Oh yeah, the THCA bullshit BS in Texas. It sucks when people exploit something like that, but the nature of a lot of people is to make money, and that was an excellent exploitation to make money, but it really ruined it for people who were more true to the plant or about the culture. So that's where I was going.
For people that don't know what we're talking about, just really quick, Texas just kind of closed all these loopholes for hemp and THC, and they made some of the most draconian penalties you've ever heard of. I think it's like
I think they went back. I'm not sure if they're new penalties or if they went back to what the actual penalties
under
used to be
4
before.
grams is 180 days to 2 years.
Insane. I've got 5 times that sitting on my desk right now.
Like 400 grams, which for people that aren't good with is under a pound, is 10 years to life. So they really came out with like some just incredibly it's just some like it sounds like, I mean, when I was in high school, sometimes when I was in high school and you'd read High Times, sometimes you'd see about somebody would get caught in Oklahoma with like 7 plants and they'd get 90 years. It's kind of like that draconian.
Yeah.
You know, it's really severe. And I'm
surprised they didn't get addicted to the money, even the government. Like saying, well, we can't just cut this off because we have been getting sales tax on this. We got to figure out how to make more money, but we don't want to lose the money that we're already getting. I'm not sure how, unless it's just the only thing worse than talking about politics is religion. But if there's,
culturally, it's just it's a very different place, and they are in my opinion, I believe Texas is the last uber populous state, like in terms of not populous like politically, but just like population wise, right? Like we have some states in this country that are very big population wise. Almost all of those big population states now have either rec or medical, right? California does, New York does, New Jersey does, Florida, Virginia, Ohio, like it's many of the biggest population states are either rec or medical, except for Texas. And I feel like Texas, because of all these loopholes and because they hadn't accepted it before, they just decided to smash the door, close, and so who knows if it'll change or not. At the moment, it's pretty intense, and I think it came across. I remember an old story, Gaby. This was in the paper, the Ukiah Daily Journal, for months at one point. This is 20 years ago. But there was this kid who had a medical card in California and grew weed in Mendo. And he went to visit his grandparents in Texas. And he got pulled over, and he had like 10 grams of weed and like 5 or 6 grams of water hash. Okay? And he got 5 years in prison. Because in that county in Texas at the time, the water hash, they considered that basically like black tar heroin.
Right.
That was concentrated drugs. And they didn't care that he had a medical card. They didn't care that and it was a big deal because actually he fled Texas and California extradited him to Texas to face his crime. You know,
Damn,
they did. They
that's
extradited
cold.
him. And well, you know, it's like if you just because something's legal where you live doesn't mean you can go somewhere where it's illegal and do whatever you want.
Yeah,
You know?
I get it. It's such a minor thing, but if you're
Sometimes,
looking black and white
sometimes,
at the law, there is no such thing as minor or major. It either is or isn't.
And so
Yeah.
people
sometimes you're just trying to get from one place to another. I'm not even trying to hang out here.
and the stupid thing about for him is that he wasn't even trying to hustle, or he literally, I think he brought 10 grams of weed and, you know, and some hash to smoke
That's
on when he was
personal.
visiting. Yeah, it was literally
Yeah.
personal, but they didn't care. It was like they caught him with a quarter ounce of heroin.
There was
because
a time.
concentrates were a different level of penalty.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I
There
didn't
was a
go
time
to
when weed was
Utah or
illegal.
drive through Utah for years because they had a zero tolerance policy. So yeah, I've avoided states in the past just because of
Nevada used to.
Yeah,
Nevada used to be the one seed would get you like life in prison.
The first dead show I ever saw, it's not West Coast, but the first Western dead show I ever saw was we drove out to the Sam Boyd Silver Bowl, right? Because the Dead were playing there. I think it was, I want to say it was 93. It was like, did Sting open for him, Gabby? Was that,
I mean,
do you remember?
I did see them with Sting opening, but I don't remember if that was
Anyway,
93.
so the two things that I remember the most about that was that it was like 115 degrees. And there was
Normal.
times when I was like, I thought I was having the best time of my life. And then there was times where I was like, if I don't find shade, I'm going to die, you know? And then it's like, it's that hot.
They were both true at the same time also.
But the Sam Boyd Silver Bowl is a giant venue. So if you've got like 80, 90,000 people dancing, that's hot, right? That's raising the heat level. And it was already that hot. But then the other part was that the thing that made me think of it was Gabby's absolutely right. You would drive into Nevada and they would have these giant signs that said marijuana, a roach, a seed is prison here. Do not bring your drugs to Nevada. They would have these big billboards announcing. Okay. And now they have giant dispensaries in Vegas. You know what I mean? And all that kind of stuff. But back then in the early 90s, it was literally like they would have these big billboards that like a seed in your ashtray is years in prison.
Damn.
Do not bring
and
drugs to our state.
I'm glad you clarified billboard because you said sign and instantly my head was like, I would have loved to have stolen that one.
No,
that would be a great one for the wall.
I mean, I'm sure if you typed it in on the internet, you would see it. They had billboards, big billboards that announced that they did not play. And do not bring that crap to Nevada, you know? And I'm
glad that we have moved away from that in so many different states, but the fight isn't truly over. You know, we in legal states, California, Washington, Oregon, we take a lot for granted. There's still kids being taken away from their family. That's why I get a little resentful every 420 when the news is making their weed puns and talking about it. Like we still have a ways to go.
Weed is not legal.
Yeah, thank you.
It's just not.
It's tolerated in some places.
Even in the most liberal places in America, right? To me, you know, in the very beginning, before, I don't know if we were recording yet, but I was kind of like, we were expounding on like what politics we could talk about and not or whatever. But like, to me, politically, with cannabis, I feel like it's not legal until like, I can understand wanting to tax me or wanting to have like a business license or something like that if I'm engaged in commerce.
Yeah.
But like the way I think about it, and I'll use an analogy here for a second, is for decades, heirloom veggies were very unpopular. And they were kept alive by a group of enthusiasts that bred them, traded them, had like, you know, little catalogs, you know, that you could order rare heirloom tomatoes or strawberries or cucumbers or amaranth or whatever the hell you wanted, you know? And even though it wasn't popular and you couldn't buy an heirloom tomato in a store, you could trade it and you could breed it. And so like right now in California, it's like, okay, it's legal if you get investment, if you get someone with a lot of money that can put down and you jump through all these hoops. To me, legal is like I'll just use alcohol for a second. Being a middle-aged man, or any of us, since we're all middle-aged men.
How about just use the example of a tomato?
But I'll just say
any
like
herb.
just alcohol, because alcohol is controlled differently than a tomato. But I could have a full bar in my house.
Yes.
I could have rare whiskey. I could be like, you know what?
But you can't make as much alcohol as you want in your house.
No, but the first grow store I ever went to in Chicago was called the Brew and Grow.
Yeah.
And half of it was homebrew, and half of it was and half of it was, was cultivation or whatever. And so, like, the whole idea that, like, private people can have 6 plants. As anybody that's familiar with cannabis, you can't do a pheno hunt with 6 plants. You can't have moms with 6 plants.
You can't save your plants.
You can't preserve things. You can't, so, like, they've loosened the laws and they've loosened restrictions, and that's a good first start. But it's also like, I mean, even just like Chad, one of my things, like, just for California, is like, I almost feel like I almost feel like one of the most important things to happen, which they would scream against huge, is direct sales. Like, for instance, if Chad is growing in a style that I really appreciate, and he's growing strains that I'm really into, I should be able to support Chad's farm, right? Yes. And I could go like, hey, Chad, I want to buy a couple ounces. And he's like, sure, I'll send you a couple ounces, right? But instead, there's these layers of distributors and stores. And so what we've done is we've made it to where if the distributor doesn't want it, or the store doesn't want it, the consumer doesn't get to see it.
No.
So they become the tastemakers, they become the gatekeepers, and they want to sell what's most profitable to them, right? Where, like, if you allow direct sales, then you could support your small farmer if you wanted. You could support the farmer that was growing all purples because you love purples, or all sativas, like Budulaire, because you love that, or whatever your little niche was. You could be like, I like what those guys are doing, and so I'm just going to buy directly from them. And then that grower, if they build themselves a little network, would be able to support themselves. You know what I'm saying? And like, but there's this, like, I look at all the rules right now as just an initial, like, toehold that we've won.
Right.
But a lot of them still need to get washed away. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, okay, you've won, but what if we tried to give it to rich people?
So can I interject something?
Yeah, sure.
You know what I think should be way easier than what you're proposing? Because you're still proposing commerce, right? So commerce is always going to be tricky. But in some places where they have medical, I'm not sure if rec, but you're not allowed to grow your own.
Washington State.
New Jersey.
We've had adult use for 14 years. Unless you have a medical card, you still can't grow a single plant at home. As far as the system, it's all, you can't vertically integrate. So I think
in New Jersey, you can't even have a medical card and grow.
Yeah, no, it's
in New Jersey, there's just no home grow.
That's not legal to me.
Yeah.
It's just not, because, like,
that's scary.
Anything else I think of is legal, right? I'm kind of allowed to do whatever I want. Now, and that's why I said commerce, because I have a acre backyard. I could fill it with asparagus. I could fill it with tomatoes. I could do breeding projects. I could be like, I want to bring back the Eastern chestnut, and I'm trying to and no one could stop me. I could do some kind of weird American breeding project that's all kooky, and, like, no one would care. It wasn't illegal. But, like, with cannabis, it's like, oh no, you haven't given us thousands of dollars in money, and you haven't jumped through all these hoops, and you haven't done all this different stuff. And so I'm not saying that path shouldn't exist if you want to be very commercial, right? But also, like, the heirloom veggie thing, like, you should be able to have passionate enthusiasts. Okay, because here's a total tangent, but it's very interesting to me, right? So California's had rec for 8 years, right? Washington was ahead of us. Colorado was ahead of us. right? So let's say, would you say that like maybe like full legal has been about 10 years?
Sure.
Like what we like, like I think Colorado was 2016 or something like that, right? In that era of legality or rec, like how much new stuff that's going to stand the test of time has come out of these rec facilities, right? Almost all killer weed starts in somebody's small situation, and then they smoke it with their friends, and then their friends are like, this is fire, and then it leaks out from there. And rec basically is still living off what was popular in the state when rec happened. You know what I'm saying? Like they've blended it and they give it new names, and they've been like, oh, I've taken this gelato by this Kush Mints by this other thing, and I've mixed it all together and I've given it this cool new name or whatever. But it's like I just wonder, with all that space and all that freedom and the rec and R&D and everything else, this is probably in the last 10 years how much new stuff is coming out that's going to stand the test of time.
I always, because I focus like a lot of like home growers.
Sure.
I've worked commercially, I've done commercially, but I love, because again, those are the people who are preserving the heirloom types of things. And I think we have seen an explosion of different strains and different expressions, because like the home grower, even though they maybe only have 6 or 16, whatever, they're looking for the unicorns. Commercially, you don't want unicorns. It's not viable. So you're looking for something different. So it does almost have to come out of that smaller craft environment, and to get politics. Like I just want the free freaking market, right? I thought that's what this country was, a free market. Let the consumer base decide if I succeed or fail. Don't let the regulation I can't even play. Hey,
NotSo, do you think, I'm going to ask you a 2-sentence question maybe.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's more people today doing those small grows and hunts than in the past? Even if there's more, right? Okay. So then the possibility of finding that stuff is just as much, if not greater.
But my point was that it's not going to come out of rec.
No.
Like
it has to get big enough.
So to tie it back into what we were talking about, that's the importance of unfettered legal home grows, because that's where the stuff's going to be found. We have 10 years of it's not coming out of rec yet. Doesn't mean it can't. It just means that like the laws and the cost and the overhead and everything pushes it for like when I was talking to these tomato farmers, okay, just to tie it into like, because a lot of people say when I go to the grocery store, the tomato there is watery and tasteless and doesn't have good texture and bullshit. And the reason for that is that the tomato growers, they grow for weight. They grow for, does the skin crack? They grow for, can it be harvested green and then ripened later? They go for, does it travel well? Now notice, I didn't mention texture, flavor, or taste, right? Like, so the reason why a lot of the grocery store food isn't maybe like as flavorful as like the heirloom veggies is because they're going for production model traits, right? So if you're in a rec farm and you're like, dude, this thing is incredible. It tests at 34% and it gives me 3.4 per LED and it's done in 48 days and this and that and what have you. and you're like, dude, I can't grow that Chem 91, Gabby. It yields like shit. It looks ugly. It's funny looking. It doesn't test as high as I want it to anymore. And so, we've kind of done the same thing to weed that we did to vegetables, which is like, instead of giving the consumers what they want, right? It's based on weight and testing.
To an extent, but do you think that the market, the consumers is driving the hype though? Because I think that's why we get the name game. I think consumers want something in particular, a name.
I think that I like I said, I think this is all early stuff, and I think that's part of the problem with like stores and distros and stuff gatekeeping. It's like it makes it difficult. Like it's the illusion of choice. You walk into a dispensary and you're like, how many cookie and gelato and Kush hybrids exist? You know what I mean? And like, and so I'm not like,
they ask you what type of experience you want or what you're looking for, and then they give you all the same thing, right?
And to what Gaby, and not to get into politics again, but I will, to what Gaby was saying, okay? It's like about to some degree, I think old school weed growers are some of the few people in America that have experienced actual unfettered raw capitalism. Okay? And what I mean by that is before the government was involved, like I said, don't get caught, do whatever you want, right? But what that meant was that when we were growing, Chad, when you're growing something, your job was to put good weed in the bag. And you either did it or you didn't do it. And if you didn't do it, you were going to have a problem moving it. And if you did put good weed in the bag, then realistically speaking, you were going to be able to find someone that was like, dude, that's good weed in the bag. I want that. That's capitalism. That's finding a willing buyer. All this other stuff with regulatory systems and tax and this and that and everything else, that's lobbying, right? All of a sudden we're getting like the more like crony capitalism that comes into herb. And lo and behold, the capitalistic part of like, is it good or not, falls by the wayside, you know? And so you're given like the illusion of like, I think about this because we're all old enough now. When I grew up in the Midwest, there was a lot of breweries in the Midwest. Okay, between Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Louis, you know, all these different places, like there was a lot of breweries. But before the craft brew market started, it was like my choice was, do I want Keystone Light? Do I want Budweiser? Do I want Milwaukee's Best? Do I want Coors? Are any of these things very different from each other? Not really. No. You know what I mean? And then these like small batch craft brews came out that tasted better. And people were like, you can do this with beer? you know what I mean? And it exploded.
The first time I ever experienced that was on Dead Tour. And it's funny because like the Deadheads were like the biggest beer snobs.
IPAs.
Like, no.
Sammy Smith. Oatmeal
Smith,
stouts.
Yeah, like
there would be dudes with coolers full of
like
Sammy
good
Smiths.
beer. Like you could they could make a killing because you had something besides like the Budweiser and the other bullshit.
Henry Weinhardt.
And so what I guess what I was trying to say is that like you can walk into the grocery store and there's 30 kinds of like light, cheap American Pilsners. And so it's sort of like an illusion of choice. And then when the craft brews came out with different flavors and different old school, they didn't reinvent anything. They just brought old beers that had fallen out of favor back into popularity. The new brew company, like the big brew companies like the Budweisers and stuff, they just ended up buying these microbrews for a shit ton of money because they wanted the brand and they wanted the aspect and stuff. And so what I'm worried about happening with legal is like, we'll get a bunch of sameness under the illusion of choice, and it'll all be about who's connected or who what benefits who. And there's such cool variation in cannabis, like, and that doesn't exist in alcohol. There's no alcohol equivalent to like the difference between Bubba Kush and Neville's Haze. Yeah. In terms of like the feeling and the experience, you know?
That wouldn't be a feeling. Yeah.
And that's why we need the kind of the free market. Again, I've grown up in the Pacific Northwest, kind of real big heart of the microbrews. So it's like I was able to see that play out from nothing to what it is today, kind of like how cannabis is doing the same thing. And we're never gonna, you know, speaking as like a craft grower, we're never gonna be able to compete on price because we can't compete on quantity. So we have to have something special. We have to have it different, and we have to do it very well. And that, I think there will always be a place for it if we're allowed to play, though. And that's what is going to sustain what I consider the culture. It's not going to be the Budweisers. It's not going to be the Curaleafs, because
and there's nothing
illusion
wrong
of choice.
With you're in college and you're broke and you and your buddies pool money together to get a case of Keystone Light for cheap. There's nothing wrong with that per se. I'm just saying, like, if you're middle aged and you want to get some heady IPA for this for a 6-pack for the same cost as a case, you should be able to do that.
Well,
and
I want to say something, because we're talking about, like, for instance, like at a farmer's market, if you go and buy fruit and vegetables at the farmer's market, it doesn't really cost more than if you go to Whole Foods. And I'm talking like specifically like for good organic produce.
Whole Foods is expensive as fuck, brother.
Right. Well, so out here I have Whole Foods and have Oliver's. You know, Safeway will have like the tiniest organic section at all. So if I want organic food, going to the farmer's market is not really more expensive. And I think if it was allowed with cannabis, it wouldn't be significantly more expensive for one reason: you're cutting out the middlemen.
I
want to
tell, this is a very brief story, but I just thought of it and I don't want to lose it because it's fucking hilarious. In Willits, okay, back when we had the shop, Gaby, I made friends with the produce guy at Safeway, okay?
Which was the only supermarket, unless you were going to the
and that Safeway, because that Safeway was the last big grocery store for basically all of northern Mendocino County. They sold more organic vegetables and fruits through that store than any other Safeway in America. Okay. Damn. Just because there was so much weed money, there was so many families that wanted it, and so it just really expanded. So I'm there one day shopping, and he's got this guy next to him, right? And he's like, "Hey, I want you to meet this guy." I'm like, "Okay." So I meet this guy, and it's a rep from Reynolds. Okay.
Oh, asking about the turkey bag.
And he's like, "This store is the #1 seller of Reynolds turkey bags in America." And they were so blown away by the level of ordering of turkey bags for the Willits Safeway that they sent the rep out there to figure out what was going on, because they wanted to expand whatever was happening in Willits to other places. And when I told him what was happening, he was so fucking bummed.
Yeah. We can't do that.
Because it was literally like, this was before you could go to a grocery store and buy like a 50 count or 100 count thing of, like, in order to get turkey bags, you had to buy the Reynolds turkey bag. Right? Wow. Like, so you would go and you would get the blue pack, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And it would have its 2 bags in there or whatever, and so on.
You'd have to buy 50 boxes.
Yeah. You'd have to buy all these
boxes. Take the cart. With the shelf,
you know, they'd be like, "Oh, my indoor's about to come down. I need 20 of these."
How many turkeys are you cooking, sir?
Dude,
so is that what you use these for?
They sent the Reynolds rep to Willits to figure out Willits' secret, because we were the #1 seller of Reynolds turkey bags in America.
If he was a businessman, he would have looked at this as opportunity and like.
But he can't duplicate it.
You can't. The problem for him is he was like, you can't
kind of duplicate.
He's like, how are you going to duplicate that in Salt Lake City? How are you going to duplicate that in Alabama? How are you going to duplicate that in North Carolina? Reynolds is like a nationwide giant.
He wasn't thinking of just like going up the coast and hitting up.
No.
There you go. That's the way to do
it. He's small in comparison to what
they were thinking. Maybe there's some new trend going on in cooking that they could then advertise and spread to the rest of America and get people to use more turkey bags in baking. And when I told him what it was for,
even if Willits sold more turkey bags than anywhere else in the nation, it still was a small amount for Reynolds. Like, they still weren't seeing that as like they didn't see to start selling the 50 packs to the grocery stores first.
No, they didn't do that at all. Yeah. No, they didn't even want it. It was almost like it's almost like Phillips, for instance. I don't know if you remember this, Gaby, but like Phillips developed this light to be pure light, right? For fabrics, for like these warehouses, for like, you know, for fabric retention and stuff like that, right? And these lights became the ceramic metal halides. And then growers realized that these lights had like an incredible spectrum, okay? And so they created like a sort of like on Phillips, they created like a little side shoot and they thought it was going to like all these legitimate places in like, for the horticultural industry in Europe and stuff like that. When they found out that it was for weed, they really weren't pleased because they were a giant corporation. You know what I'm saying? They weren't like, it wasn't like just some heady dudes or whatever. It was like, it's Phillips, but yeah, I just thought of that because there was a point at which the green rush was so real. The Safeway in Willits was the number one Safeway in America for organic vegetables and produce,
and turkey bags,
and the top seller of Reynolds turkey bags of any single grocery store in America. We were the number one seller of Turks. And
I want to
talk about how hilarious is that?
Chad really might have a question or two.
Well, it is hilarious because again, I see them following the data. There's this giant uptick per capita. Why is this happening? Let's send a guy there to figure it out, and then we'll duplicate it. And we'll bring it to different markets throughout the country, and then to find out it's only weed. It's just like, oh shit.
Yeah, we're not duplicating that.
No. The illusion of organic though. It's 10 years ago. It was only a 2-year program, but it was a sustainable ag and small farm systems program that I went to. Because again, like. Music is my background. I was making music long before I went to audio engineering school, but I went there because I wanted to learn the why. I was already growing before I went to school to learn how to grow because I wanted more of the why behind it. But the illusion of organic, again, we're being sold that kind of like we're being sold choice of canna. Just the regulations of what was considered organic 10 years ago when I started and was learning most of this stuff compared to what actually qualifies today is a night and day difference. Like we are being sold some serious wolf tickets. So support your local gardener and support the CSAs and the farmers markets, because the organic labeling in the grocery store isn't what you think it is for most people.
The only thing I'll say about that is like, if you're having to buy at the grocery store, okay,
more money too. That's why they do it,
right? But if you're having to buy at the grocery store, if you happen to miss the farmers market or whatever, at least in California, when you're buying in the organic section, that's when you have the opportunity to buy the local stuff. You can see like what's organic made in Mexico, right? Sometimes. Sonoma County, like because it is a farming community, there's more of it, But yeah, shopping at the farmers market and buying stuff from the growers is always the best thing, and it would be great if we had that for cannabis.
I have a lot of I don't know. I have a lot of weird thoughts about organic.
NotSoDog has weird thoughts.
I always say though, just because it's local doesn't mean it's good either. That's another thing a lot of people get caught up in. But it's a local farm. Well, the shit farms have to be somewhere.
Before you tell us your weird thoughts, are they more weird than the dildo hanging beads in the?
But what
it's a big dildo.
Okay, so what I'll say about that is like just a longtime smoker and grower. Okay, trying to teach people how to grow or dealing with people in the cannabis space, right? I feel like feeding and like there's all these like subcultures that almost become like religion, right? Whether it's like I'm KNF or I'm no-till or I'm, I don't use bottles, right? Like, oh, you use bottles of some kind or, what have you. And like when I worked, in the store, and Gaby and you build relationships with suppliers and stuff like that. Like the concept I always try to tell people is like it's all trade-offs, right? Like if you get bone meal or blood meal, they're not from organic animals, even though it's fully OMRI, right? If you get feather meal, there's lots of stuff that's from the meat byproducts from the meat packing industry. Right, but it's full OMRI. So I would try to tell people, they'd be like, "Oh, you're like, GH is evil," and I'm like, "Yeah, but that bone meal is from McDonald's cows. Unless you have your own local source that you know of for sure, the blood meal is what comes off the slaughterhouse floor for your Burger King Whopper, right? Or." And I'm dead serious. Like all the antibiotics, all the all the mad cow, all the, the chems and the weird stuff that they use in commercial farming and feedlots and all that stuff.
Yeah.
The byproducts of feedlots are omri.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you want to use, and so I always consider it as like there's always trade-offs, right? Like we used to sell a ton of stuff from the ocean, okay, which I personally feel grows great cannabis, right? A lot of ocean-based products, crab meals, shrimp meals, fish hydrolysate, whatever, but then we get rec and we get heavy metals testing and we realize a lot of stuff from the ocean is high in heavy metals that we don't like.
Yeah.
Even if you want to go with bat guano or seabird guano or something, in order to get that guano, you're disturbing habitat. And the reason why you get Peruvian bat guano or Indonesian bat guano isn't because they've got more guano than America. It's because in America we have OSHA and you can't send a 10-year-old kid with a bandana around his face and a shovel and a bucket into the cave. We have rules. I mean, you're laughing, Gabby, but
no, I shouldn't be. That was terrible. And
it's true.
But
it's sad but true.
Like the poop comes from third world countries where they have less protections, right? We have a ton of bats producing bat guano in America. But
I've never seen anyone sell American bat guano.
But it's
probably also considered like protecting it for environment.
Because we have OSHA, so you'd have to have
not just OSHA. Probably they're like protecting the environment or something.
Yeah, but and so it's like if you to get guano, you have to go and scrape out a cave, or to get seabird guano, you have to go and disturb their habitat and scrape off the rocks. Or I guess what I'm saying is that it's very difficult in organics to find something that doesn't have some kind of ethical trade-off.
Fair. I mean, sourcing, to your point, sourcing is super important.
And that's hard, and it's I mean, okay, like this is totally different, but we started growing before cocoa was common. Did you ever hear why cocoa became common, Chad?
I mean, from what I know, it's just a waste product, so why not close a loop somehow?
There was things where in Europe and stuff like that, they looked at peat moss as hurting the environment, right? Digging up peat bogs and stuff like that. Like
it wasn't that peat moss was hurting the environment. It was the removal of the peat bogs.
Well, they were hurting the environment by digging up the bogs and all this different stuff. So they were looking for some kind of organic, renewable resource that they could replace peat with that didn't have such environmental degradation. And what they found was that there was these giant piles of coconut husks in Sri Lanka and India and whatever else that they ripped off to get to the coconut. And they were like, oh, this could be organic. This could be renewable. This is like already a waste product. It's not disturbing any habitats or anything like that. But when they first started selling cocoa in America, like Gabby and I, we had a bunch of pissed off customers because some of the lower quality stuff would come infused with a lot of sea salt, a lot of high sodium content. It wasn't buffered right. Cocoa has an ability to steal a bunch of calcium. And so if you don't buffer it and rinse it and treat it the right way before you get it. So now everybody does that. But in the beginning, there was a couple sources of high quality, clean cocoa. And there was other sources that were cheaper that didn't have that. And then people would try to grow in their like salty cocoa, high sodium because it's right there on the ocean. And they would have all kinds of struggles. And so it's just hard to find like free lunch. You know what I mean?
It is. You can't do it at scale. You could do it if you're small enough and you have the time, but there is a catch-22 there because if you're only growing 4 plants, are you really going to make a whole bunch of ferments? Not really, because it takes time, it takes storage. At scale, too hard to do it as well. But there is a sweet spot for it. But not everybody cares.
I'm just saying that like there's a lot more nuance to like to like, oh, I'm organic versus like I could be completely organic, only growing in bone meal, blood meal, and feather meal. But to be honest, I kind of think like GH3 part would be cleaner than, than like the McDonald's,
So
like,
can I say something about the supermarket and why I only buy organic? It's not because of how it's fed. It's because
the pesticides.
And there's at least more restrictions on what they're going to put on those plants. And with the conventional stuff, you just have no idea. Like, so they fucked up the standards for organic gardening, and they allow organic certification, and they allow more and more shit that they shouldn't. But it's still going to be less than what you're going to get when you buy the conventional stuff.
And here's something that actually wound up in the Supreme Court within the last year or two and this is important. If it's labeled organic and it comes from a country outside of the US, it's all on the honor system. They don't have the same burden of proof as a US farmer. And that's what actually brought the case to the Supreme Court is US farmers have to prove and document all of these things. But if it says organic from another country, it's on the honor system. It's on the honor system. Honor system. Which is a scary thought.
So what Chad was saying in the beginning is organic when it was just a bunch of like disorganized hippies and back to land types and, various people, organic had a certain standard, right?
Yeah.
And then when big money got involved and they realized they could sell fruits and vegetables and organic things for 2, 3, 4, 5 times the cost of conventional, well, then people with profit start looking at, well, how do we throw that label on it, but still keep costs down? Can we still use sludge in our fields? Can we redefine what constitutes organic? And that being said, all that stuff that I was just railing about with bone meal and blood meal and feather meal and all that, I do think that using that in gardens and using that, like those byproducts, they are worthwhile to use. I'm just saying that, like, I think a lot of people in cannabis think one side is like this pure white light with no trade-offs that they're using, and then the other side is this evil cheat code that you're only using if you're kind of a dirtbag.
Maybe next we should talk BHO and rosin, right? It's the same. It's the same, like, No, I'm not actually saying we should talk BHO and rosin, but it's the same thing, right?
But
like people believe that it's either organic or it's not.
And you can see with like companies like Build-A-Soil and other groups that sell like pretty like heady mixes or whatever, a lot of them have switched to fish bone meal over cow bone meal because they don't like what the cow bone meal like.
But what about the heavy metals?
Ethical sourcing, right?
What about the ethical heavy metals?
Well, that's a different subject. Like when I worked in Santa Barbara at a big farm, one of the real issues was like we were trying to keep heavy metals low. And so they required us to test all of the inputs that we wanted to bring in. Most compost will fail for heavy metals.
Yikes.
Right? Everything, because if you think about it, heavy metals are heavy. They don't want to go away. Compost is you're concentrating organic matter over time. You're breaking it down, right? And so it doesn't go away. There's a bunch of it in the ocean, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's just like, with like pregnant women, like they tell pregnant women, if you're going to eat fish, you should eat the smallest fish you can, because the larger fish like tuna and stuff like that will probably have mercury in them because they're eating smaller things that have mercury and they're accumulating more mercury. And so I just the concept that I like to bring in all the time is like life's about trade-offs.
Yeah.
Right? There's very rarely, and especially into growing, there's very rarely a no trade-off. Like I think guano is some of the coolest stuff to grow with, but you're definitely disturbing habitat. And Gaby and I have had friends that have gotten fungal infections in their lungs from mixing soils and adding guanos without wearing appropriate attire, masks and stuff. Yeah. And they got sick and they got fungal infections from the poop because you're dealing with powdered poop.
I know people that have been made, even if it's temporarily ill, from spraying organic pesticides that they thought they didn't have to wear proper protection because it was organic. It's like, bro, like, so, whatever you're using, you have to use protection. I use dry mineral salts. I use cutting edge louder powder. I wear a mask. When I'm putting that stuff in, it's important.
As I've gotten older and seen the repercussions from some of these things of not doing it, I definitely do it. And I built a little skate ramp outside, and I wear my helmet. So that tells you where I'm at these days.
I'm hereby saying that I want to see some videos of Chad skateboarding, and I don't mean like old ones that were like changed from like
right. I got some old.
No. I mean, you can show us the old ones like then and now, but we need to see them both.